And thank you, everyone, for joining us in this, what I think is going to be a very interesting conversation and one that I've been looking forward to for a while with Ethan Nichtern. Ethan, as you know, is a Buddhist teacher, author of a bunch of books you probably know all about. But if you don't, I think your curiosity will be piqued tonight. But they are amazing and really thoughtful explorations of really like rich and contemporary views on thought and practice. I think he's a great writer and an honest one, which is that voice of authenticity that we are often missing. He's the host of the Road Home podcast that you heard Fru mention. That's in my personal rotation. He's got a great Substack and a bunch more. Ethan, thank you so much for being here. Welcome. And I wonder if you'd start us off when you're ready with maybe a brief practice to help us arrive.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much, Steve, and thank you, Fru, and thank you everyone for being here. Always great to be with Garrison virtually and to go up there and practice and teach and our annual retreat there. It's always just really a highlight of my year. So thanks for having me in this forum. I hope everybody's feeling good, and maybe we can just take a few minutes to arrive in simple mindfulness together. Um, so we'll only be practicing for a few minutes. That's the great thing about a meditation session is it's impermanent, so it will always end, and this one will end quite quickly. So just wherever your body is in space, if there's a way you want to place your palms to still the movements of our hands, you can do that. If it feels easiest to gently drop the curtains of your eyelids and close your eyes to come into the body, you can do that. Or you can stay in your environment visually. Just let your gaze be slightly downward. So meditation is sometimes referred to as taking one seat, which has a sense of connecting with the earth, claiming our place, and feeling a sense of belonging. For right now, this is my spot. So let's see if we can pay attention to our sits bones, maybe our feet on the floor if you're in a chair. Just feel like you can claim your spot on earth for the next 3 or 4 minutes. As a further anchor, we have the easeful movement of the breath, feeling that sensation. That anchor to the present moment. So just feel your seat, feel your breath, and if your mind wanders, just gather back. We'll just do this for 2 more minutes. Thank you all for practicing together.
Well, thank you, Ethan, and thank you everyone for joining us. And I have the privilege of getting to ask you a bunch of questions, and look forward to also facilitating some questions from our attendees a little bit later. I want to dig in a bit to this book, Confidence, that I had the opportunity to enjoy as I was preparing for our conversation. And I'll tell you my journey toward reading this book, which was um, this kind of confusion of walking through the bookstore. And this is a classified as a Buddhism and psychology text. And as I wander through that section of a bookstore, usually, and I usually do, I don't see a lot of books that are titled confidence in that section. And confidence is usually the problem. We're a little overconfident, or we need to
Mhm.
develop some humility. Where'd this come from? What is this?
Yeah, yeah. Well, from various places. I mean, one is I work with a lot of students and on, their Buddhist practice and their meditation practice and their experience of mind and life. And this conversation kept recurring about how to not be confident in a kind of bravado way, but in a how do we really show up fully, not just to our meditation practice, but but also to the parts of life that are hard. What does it mean to show up with confidence? And um, I think there's also something about you write. Some people say you write what you know, but I think, from a kind of spiritual standpoint, you write what your struggle has been, so this is an area that I've worked with and struggled with. It is an area that it's a term that is sometimes not associated with the Buddhist teachings, but it's also in studying the Shambhala teachings, which was a very modern subset of the Tibetan Buddhist teachings. It's a topic that occurs there quite a lot. I think if you go looking for it in classic or early Buddhism, it's actually there a lot. And also I wanted to decode it, from the standpoint of our cultural moment and maybe our political moment too, where I do think we live in an era of a lot of false confidence. Actually, I was reminded that the term con man is short for confidence man, right? Somebody who takes
Mhm.
you into their confidence. So um, uh, if you look up the word in the dictionary, it means something like firm trust, right? So trust in one's mind, trust in oneself. And I do think from that standpoint, learning to trust our mind is, what we're trying to do in the journey of awakening, at least. And uh, another way of looking at it is the completely trusting your mind is this, mystical term enlightenment, if we could completely trust. But for all those reasons that it's been a struggle for me, that it was a struggle for so many people I was working with, that it seems a little bit controversial. I like that the title that New World Library designed for it has a nice all lowercase font rather than our all caps font. Never trust somebody who writes in all caps all the time. That should be a Buddhist principle. Um, but yeah, I wanted to get into that sort of tension or that controversy of like, is this something we need, or is this the problem? You know?
In your framing, I mean, this is a framing of what confidence grounded in the Dharma would look like, but the framing requires, I think, and I don't know how much time you want to spend on this, Ethan, but the subtitle is holding your seat through life's eight worldly winds, and maybe we need to just kind of give that framework before we dig into what we're trying to keep our seat steady within that space.
Yeah, yeah. So holding your seat is an interesting term. Um, it's in the way that I first learned meditation when I was a teenager, which was in the Shambhala community, because that's the community I grew up in. Uh, the idea of like really claiming your posture in meditation was called taking your seat. Um, and there was a sense of actual confidence and dignity in that, the way it was taught. It wasn't some act of disappearing. It was really like, the Buddha, when he attained awakening, touched the earth, as a sort of like claiming a deep connection with the earth. Like, I belong here, and I'm going to work, I'm going to be here for until I'm not here anymore. Um, and then there was also this term of when the mind or when life throws something hard at us and we actually are able to stay with it, right? So if you stay with a difficult thought or you stay with a difficult experience or you make it through a day in a meditation retreat, which you always find that the day does end, in a meditation retreat, that what Pema Chodron calls learning to stay. Another way of saying that is holding your seat, right? So I was really interested in this idea of like actually confidence as being like the willingness to show up and stay with difficult experiences. And the eight worldly winds has always been one of my favorite early Buddhist lists or teachings. It's often associated with this quality of what is often kind of confusingly translated as equanimity, right? And in some ways, I think that word, which is upekkha in the early Buddhist teachings, which most often gets translated as equanimity, confidence was sort of my translation of that. Sometimes these eight worldly winds are called, one of my teachers, Sharon Salzberg, calls them the vicissitudes, which feels like a very, high school English class, SAT prep word, vicissitude. It's fun to say though. But sometimes they're called the eight worldly phenomenon. But I like this idea of like they are winds, they are forces of the world. And the eight are really four pairs. So in each pair, the first pair is pleasure and pain. The second pair is praise and criticism. The third pair translate a few different ways, but is fame or influence and insignificance. Sometimes disrepute is the way the negative of that one is taught, and or infamy. And the last one is either called just generally success and failure, or gain and loss. And so in each of these four pairs, there's an experience that humans always have, like pleasure, that hits us like a wind in a certain way, like a force. And you're sitting there trying to live your life. I'm just sitting here trying to live my life. And all of a sudden, something really pleasant happens. We get praised. We succeed in some way, right? Things feel good. And on the other side, there is a feared experience, right? I'm just trying to live my life. And all of a sudden, pain hits. I get a medical diagnosis, or I throw my back out, or, something like that. Or somebody criticizes my work, or nobody shows up at my birthday party. I'm insignificant. I am not famous among my group of friends, or I lose something I care about, or my big project fails, right? And so it's these basic structures of you try to be a person in the world, and sometimes a really great thing happens and it hits you like a wind. And sometimes a really bad thing happens and it hits you like a wind, but they all have a kind of force. And so this sense of how do we hold our seat with those forces, which is, again, traditionally the eight worldly winds are taught with this quality of equanimity, but I really like linking them together with this notion of that holding of one seat is what we're talking about in terms of confidence.
I really appreciate, so in the book you explore these, of course, these pairs in this detailed way that you've just outlined. And I will say in my own study and journey, I think I've had a tendency in the past to sort of find my way through these worldly winds through a sense of detachment. So don't get caught by the praise, so that you're not susceptible to the blame. And what struck me in your book is that I feel like you seem to be suggesting to engage with things more openly and with more vulnerability. That there's this more authentic or maybe even mature place where, like sometimes you're going to get praised, and rather than get caught by it, like there is a more mature and healthy way to do it. It's not shutting it out, it's working with both. And is that a theme across the book? Am I catching that right?
Yeah, yeah. This, I think in some ways my approach to the Buddhist teachings, if I was a controversial person, like, before this, we talked about, well, you're one of the Buddhist teachers who really says what he thinks politically, which, there's reasons for that. But I think in another way, if I was a controversial Buddhist person, it would be because I don't know that detachment is really what this is all about, you know? In other words, the more we try to detach from an experience, it's not what I've found is the effect of practicing a lot of mindfulness, that things affect me less, right? I've actually found through becoming more, when I'm more and more attentive, when I'm practicing more, I find myself more sensitized to experience. And there was actually an experiment that was done neuroscientifically, which I think actually hearing the lecture about this experiment was also kind of put a lot of things in place for me as I was writing this book. This was maybe 2016 or 2017. I went to hear a lecture here in New York City. It was at the time between a young Tibetan Lama, who many of you may be familiar with, named Mingyur Rinpoche. He's written a lot of really great books. And Richie Davidson. Dr. Davidson is probably the foremost neuroscientist who studied the effects of meditation on the brain and on the nervous system. He's at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and they had set up this pain receptor experiment. So pain and pleasure, again, are the first two of the worldly winds. And I think there's a reason the Buddha categorized the other worldly winds, which are more psychological, more reputational, more social, after he got to this basic aspect of our nervous system, which is how we respond to pleasure and pain. And so they did this experiment, and I end up telling the story a lot because the experiment puts a lot together for me about mindfulness practice and why detaching from our feelings or detaching from how things are affecting us is not only not going to help, it might even actually hurt our practice and hurt our ability to be more present. So they did a pain receptor experiment. The way they set up this experiment was they had these heated metal plates that they could heat and cool very quickly, and that they would strap you into and would give your skin a burning sensation without actually damaging the skin. So it was a real painful experience, but it would not, cause damage. And it's a 30-second interval that they're mapping your pain receptors. Only for the middle 10 seconds are you actually experiencing the painful sensation. So that's important. So at second 0, the person says to you, soon you will be having a painful experience, right? Which is a lot of what life is, right? At some point, I know it's going to hurt. I don't know when yet, and then at second 10, that's when the actual pain starts, and it ends at second 20, but they keep monitoring your pain receptors for 10 more seconds. So it's almost like a 3-phase experiment, like preparation or bracing, and the actual lived experience of the present moment pain, and then the perseverating or reflecting after the fact. So the control group for this experiment is people who've never done any mindfulness practice before. And what was interesting, but maybe predictable, was they definitely had a higher pain experience during the middle 10 seconds when they were actually experiencing the burning sensation. However, as soon as they heard, soon you will be having a painful experience, their pain receptors lit up, right? And even after the pain ended, those last 10 seconds, when you're in that moment of like, why did I sign up for this? That really hurt. Like, what the hell did you do that to me for? Their pain receptors are still lit up. So in the control group, they basically have 30 seconds of a painful experience, right? And this is what life without mindfulness is kind of like, sure, the real pain is worse, but you're kind of hating it the whole time because you're preparing for pain, then living in pain, then perseverating on the pain, right? And making up stories about the pain. So Mingyur Rinpoche was their master meditator for the experiment. He's done a lot of experiments with Dr. Davidson. And Dr. Davidson in this lecture is describing what happened, and he claims to be surprised by the result, right? And so Mingyur Rinpoche supposedly has no response for the first 10 seconds, almost no response. So they say, Rinpoche, soon you're going to experience a painful experience. And he goes, okay. Nothing really happens in his pain receptors. And after they say his pain receptors go back to normal, to baseline quite quickly, right? So he recovers quite quickly. But the question that Dr. Davidson asked to the audience is, what happens during the actual experience of pain for a master meditator, right? And this, I think, is the key to what's wrong with detaching, right? It turns out that his pain receptors spiked higher than the control group. He felt, a master meditator, when the pain was happening, he felt the pain more, right? So this is really hard to advertise, right? This is why the meditation app is called Calm. It's not called, be present. People don't really want to be present. They want calm, right? But this is what Buddhist meditation does is, well, first of all, the pain only is for 10 seconds rather than 30, right? But what Dr. Davidson said was, I should have known because his sense gates are so open, right? But he felt the pain more. So then I start to extrapolate my experience, as I practice more, as I put myself out there in all the different social ways, as I put my work out into the world, you get a 2-star out of 5-star review on Goodreads. You can be as enlightened as you want. If you worked for a couple of years on that book, there's going to be a moment that if you're paying attention, you go, ouch, right? Mm-hmm. Especially if somebody criticizes like accurately, it's like, ouch, there's a painful experience. If somebody praises you, I don't care how awake you are, like it's going to feel good, Mm-hmm. If you bite into something sweet, it's going to feel good. If your work has some influence, especially from a Buddhist standpoint, if your work has some influence that actually helps you help other people, that's going to feel good. If nobody calls you on your birthday, that's going to be unpleasant, success and failure. These are real experiences. Wind hits us, it has a force, and to pretend to desensitize isn't really awakened humanity, right? So that was the extrapolating that I did from the pain experiment to say, what if this is true of all the other winds too? Like that a more awakened person, if you criticize them, mm-hmm. they feel, ouch, but then it's mm-hmm. over. That's the other part, mm-hmm. right? That's the experience of mindfulness. When it's done, right? You're not worried about the criticism for days before you get the review. You're not perseverating on it afterwards, but you go, shucks, 2-star review. Okay. All right. That one hurts. And then you move on. Right. And I think that's, holding your seat is actually feeling more what you're feeling for as long as it's actually happening,
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. It's almost like an experiment design around the stories that clutter our thinking and experiencing. It's there's the difference between something unpleasant or painful and suffering is the attachment of that story.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
My sense is that, and just from the progress I've been able to make, there's a little less in that, bracing period, the pre-period, the anticipatory period. There's a little less like narrative of they're all going to hate me, or this is going to be the worst thing that ever happened to me. There's just a little more what's happening right now, right?
Mm. Ethan, the other thing that surprised me in your book is this the amount of time and space you spend developing and discussing ideas of lineage. And I felt I understood lineage and the importance of lineage very well. And there's this a lot of really powerful and important veneration of teachers and ancestors and so on in various practices. There's this really lovely Zen tradition of taking the precepts and then writing out by hand the all of your ancestors, starting with the Buddha all the way to your teacher, and then adding your name to the end. And it's this like really rich, of course, resource and reminder of the practice. And that's not exactly that's only one dimension of
Mm.
what you mention and include in lineage. And one of my notes, and I have come back to it a couple of times over the last few weeks, is this idea that lineage in your writing is everything in the past, the present, and the painful. And I just wanted to hear you talk about why is lineage such a big part of confidence, the book and the idea.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so lineage is a huge part of the Buddhist teachings, and it's working with this. So in the first half of the book, I really do a very deep dive into the eight worldly winds. The second half of the book is structured around what I call the four powers of confidence, and two of these we're going to talk about in depth at the retreat at the end of September. Which the practice of Windhorse, and then this notion of the confidence of lineage, right? And lineage is, I think it's a tricky question, especially in the modern, more agnostic or secular Western world, especially with
Yeah.
all of our kind of the scars of the past. It's hard to kind of always feel like we came from wisdom in the past. So, but why is lineage associated with confidence? Well, there's a sense of actually looking to a tradition as a support for what you're going through as a human in the present, right? So the reason in the Zen tradition that you go through, it's a little problematic because they're called the patriarchs, right, rather than the elders or the lineage figures, or a lot problematic. So that has to be updated and worked with and acknowledged. But there's a sense in that of like, I am holding something that has been passed to me, and I am also going to experience all of the obstacles, that those before me experienced. There's an interesting lineage in Tibetan Buddhism called the Karma Kagyu lineage, which is sometimes referred to as the mishap lineage because it is literally a lineage of people who were really, really confused and down in the dumps, and had a lot of confused experiences, did a lot of confusing things, but through that process were able to attain awakening, right?
Mm.
So you call on these folks, or you make some relationship to them, and you say, wow, they were screw ups as well, right? I actually can call on their support. I don't have to feel like I'm in this all alone. People have done this before, you know? And I think in anything we pursue, like actually calling on lineage is really important. If you're a writer, I feel very connected to writer lineage, family lineage. I talk a lot about my grandmother, or a little bit about my grandmother as both an amazing heroic figure in my family lineage, also a complicated person. Maybe great grandmother, not so great mother, right? But she wasn't my mother. So,
Mhm.
right. So, but when there are certain hard things that I have done in my life where I actually tried to invoke lineage, which is a complicated process. And there are visualization practices for actually working with lineage and coming to feel, because I think we feel like what we've inherited is working against us when we think about intergenerational trauma or karma or anything. And the Buddhist approach is saying like what we've inherited also includes great wisdom. And just like, all the scenes in the Star Wars movies where the living person who's struggling calls on the dead Jedi, and then Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda are there and say, "We're here with you, we can help you."
Mhm.
And actually that can be really helpful in holding our seat. But if we think all we're inheriting is, the past is entirely kind of out to get us, then it's going to be really hard to hold our seat because we're going to feel like we're alone in everything. But if we can visualize and imagine, you know, all of those screw ups from the Buddha onward, and the Buddha was a pretty big screw up, actually. He was just a talented screw up. Um, uh, and you say, please come be with me, with your own experiences of obstacles and also with your wisdom mind and support me in this obstacle, it can feel really, really empowering, and I think this is something that in indigenous cultures around the world, there's a lot more experience of actually ancestor practice, lineage practice, and you actually bring the wisdom out and then you feel like you're not alone in whatever the difficult circumstances. Yeah.
I I am so appreciative for the authenticity that I mentioned earlier, not just in the book, but I hear you speak about it a good bit on the podcast. And you talk about your own experience with your own lineage. You've already talked a little bit about that, but especially in the Shambhala tradition. And I'd love just to get your sense of how we can tell when there's this moment in our understanding of our lineage where is it helping us grow, or whether it's time to kind of question and transform what we've inherited.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I don't consider myself part of just one lineage, but my main lineage and the one that I grew up in and the one that I was a teacher in was the Shambhala lineage. And I still feel very connected to a lot of those teachings. It also was organizationally, as a worldwide organization, it was, in my humble opinion, very hierarchically confused. Um, it was founded by a very brilliant and very complicated person, and his son, whose name's Sakyong Mipam, who was credibly accused of sexual misconduct in 2018. Uh, like a lot of spiritual traditions, Western and Eastern, the organizational apparatus of it basically fell apart. And, that was a very interesting experience for me. The way I described it, because I was the senior teacher in residence for the New York Shambhala community at that time. But I was studying with other folks as well. I had started my own organization, the Interdependence Project, too, other Tibetan teachers, insight and Zen teachers, and, Western psychotherapy. And so I have always been interested in a lot of things, but, Shambhala always felt, the Shambhala community always felt like my family, but the way I described it was my cousin's family. So it was like I just got finished watching the series The Bear, which there's all these cousins who aren't really cousins in The
Right.
Bear. It's a very Chicago story, but it felt sort of like that. Like this is family, but it's not exactly your family. So like if you go to your cousin's house for Thanksgiving, you see the dysfunction, you see what's beautiful, but you have a hard time kind of talking, about it because it's not quite your family, but it is your family at the same time. But you don't have the power to really um, do much about whatever the dysfunctional conversations are. And at the same time, you love your family, it's beautiful. So then your family moves out, your cousins move out of town, and it's the next Thanksgiving. And you say, there's kind of a simultaneous like grieving and a relief because it's like a feeling of, oh, I really miss my cousins. What am I going to do this Thanksgiving? But then there's also this feeling of, well, thank God I don't have that obligation anymore. And both those feelings kind of co-emerge. And then, you try to figure out what was really good about Thanksgiving and what needed to fall apart there. And, it's given me a lot to think about in terms of, I think there's in the Tantric Buddhist tradition, I think there's so much really amazing wisdom. I think the guru model, which is a particular model of transmission and teachings and the hierarchies, in a lot of ways are really outdated for, and I'm just saying that as my opinion and also just the folks that I'm working with, I think are looking for something to be devoted to, but also not somebody to worship. And I don't think it's intrinsic to the guru model or those tantric Buddhist teachings that one needs to express devotion through worship. I was always really bad at that, but I was really devoted to the community and practices in the ways that I could be. And so I think there's a lot, that needs to be updated. And in some ways, for me, what happened in the Shambhala community was good preparation for what's happening now in America and the world, this sense of old systems falling apart and some people trying to hold on to them desperately, and then other people coming in, like what happened in New York City was like we could do things completely differently. And guess what? Whatever you think of what just happened in New York City, it is the first time in any election I know that people under 30 voted at higher rates than older folks. That is a total game changer, right? It's people saying we could do things completely differently, right? And hopefully there's a little both, like what was good about what's inherited, and also we could do things differently. So that's the way I feel about lineage overall. And I think lineage is also a very personal exploration, and there are practices that we can do to work with that. And that's really what we're going to focus on at the retreat in September. But it's really hard to I think these teachings are really useful for pointing us in the direction of lineage as a really helpful and healthy container for each of us, but it's impossible to tell somebody else what their lineage is or what their relationship to it should be. And that's what I see as the possibility of Dharma emerging now in this kind of 21st century space, is a real connection to what came before, but also like really new modes of expression that might not look the same.
I'm going to try and squeeze one more question in before we move to kind of opening up the floor, Ethan. But I wonder, Fru, if we need any special instructions. I feel like maybe the universe is either trying to tell me something, or I'm recognizing a real moment for the concept of spiritual friendship in Buddhist discussion right now. I feel like I've heard several talks recently, and it's like kind of keeps popping up. And it's made me kind of reflect and integrate that with confidence. And I want confidence to be a solo project, so like how does this work with spiritual friendship or intersect?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is such a fascinating existential question for humans the solo project versus the group and with the group project, because part of the Dharma teachings is recognizing that we are always alone with our own mind. So we do have to solo it. If we are relying so much on external measures of how we're doing and validation, we will suffer, right? But we are completely social and communal creatures, and you're not supposed to practice meditation without sangha. Sangha is one of the three jewels. They're interlocking. You need community, and the notion of spiritual friendship is an interesting one, because there's this term in Pali and Sanskrit, Kalyanamita and Kalyanamitra. Sometimes the word is the word for a spiritual teacher. Like, I use that word with the students who study with me. Like, it has a sense of like noble mentor, right? So in some traditions, Kalyanamitra is like the one who holds. It's not necessarily an instructor who you just might like, go on retreat with them or listen to their podcast or do a course with them, or have read their book. It's not the guru, but it's like the teacher who knows you and walks the path with you. It's like personal mentorship. There's an interesting article by a Naropa professor about the way Chogyam Trungpa talked about the Kalyanamitra in relationship to a person-centered psychotherapist, right? So that's one usage. In the earlier Buddhist teachings, though, it's really Kalyanamita, which literally means something like noble friend, is used to talk about the kind of peer relationship where a sangha or a communal relationship elevates each other, right? So like an example of this could be like a meditation buddy who you meet with on FaceTime every morning, or you text when you meditate. You're both interested in practice. And because you're there to support each other, you end up practicing more. This sort of more peer-to-peer model. You're meeting together and you're supporting each other's practice. So you're bringing out each other's kind of more virtuous or higher qualities. I definitely think we all need this. We can't take, I talk about not being a spiritual libertarian, right? We do better. We do what the people around us do and model to us, right? If there's nothing wrong with going to the bar, but if all of your friends are at the bar, that's the most likely place, we're going to find you, right? If all of your friends are at the yoga studio, you're probably going to hang out at the yoga studio, right? If all of your friends are at the art gallery, that's where you'll be. And so that notion of like, we can't do this alone, and peer-to-peer elevating each other, that was the initial meaning of this term spiritual friend. And I think it's a very powerful sort of peer upliftment, if that's even a word.
Perfect. I have a question from Lauren Hartley in the chat, and I welcome folks either to put your question directly in chat, or you can just raise your hand if you're comfortable coming on camera and sharing with us. Lauren's question: could you please talk a bit about the Interdependence Project? I love this question because I love that project. Your original idea for it, how it evolved, and what worked, challenges, priorities, and so on.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. The bad news, if there is any, it's not really bad news, but the Interdependence Project doesn't exist anymore. I think it dissolved as an organization last year, which was in its kind of third executive director ship phase. So I was the founder and the original executive director. I was only involved from when we started as an informal group in 2005 until I think I stepped down in 2010 or 2011, and then I kept teaching there for a little while. But it was a grassroots community that started as a meditation and Buddhist studies group that had a lot of drop-in classes. We were interested in the relationship between mindfulness and Dharma practice with arts and activism work. So we worked with a few local community organizing groups and activists in like 2006, 2007 on a project to try to eliminate plastic bags in New York City, which I think happened like 10 years after that. We had a whole, we had arts, programming, etc. We were a struggling nonprofit based in New York's East Village, and then they moved to be co-housed in the annex of the New York Insight community for a while. So the idea was to have kind of a multi-pronged secular and applied approach to Dharma. Is interesting because it did feel like another era. It definitely felt like another era of my career. It's really hard to start a not-for-profit. What worked is also what didn't work is it really relies on community. And anybody who's ever done community building or community organizing is people love community. Everybody craves it. And it's really hard to get people to be consistently showing up for community. And so I would say that was the kind of original intent. As it went forward, we did develop a whole year-long meditation and Dharma teacher training program, a non-sectarian approach. That I think worked well. That's always been my approach, is to invite and teach from different tradition or different lineage standpoints. So yeah, I mean, I certainly learned a lot. I think it's I think that the two biggest ways that I've learned in my career are definitely working one-on-one with Dharma students, which I do quite a lot of, has taught me quite a lot about myself and about others. And starting a community-centered nonprofit, which I sort of would love everybody to do, because it definitely, whenever we complain about how organizations work, I think it's really nice to have to get in there and kind of run or facilitate a community to find out what the actual challenges are, because it's not easy to start and build community. So yeah, my current priorities are, I'm starting a platform with my friend and colleague Lou Sharma, which is an online Dharma platform. So definitely teaching is my main priority. I mean, I still do, in my spare time, I do creative nonfiction, creative writing. That's not my main published writing. And I also, I'm trying to get out there as much as possible and protest when protest is called for. Looking forward to going to the Foley Square action next Thursday in honor of John Lewis. I feel very strongly as a Dharma practitioner about being in support of immigrants. Not just because if you're in the United States, literally every single person who is not indigenous is an immigrant, and actually they're immigrants too. They just came here 15,000 years ago. But from a Buddhist standpoint, the view of Buddhism, the existential view of Buddhism, is that every single sentient being is a migrant moving through experience, trying to find home and safety, right? Every single sentient being, and there's no way to study Buddhism and get around that, right? We are all immigrants always, and it's really important to show up for those communities. And it's been really, really horrifying to watch what's happened here. So I hope everybody is getting involved that way. I had a conversation with a student today who was just in Berlin, and she said she's a student in California, and she said they're very blunt there. And her cab driver, when she got in, and she said, "I'm from California." He said, "Your country is in a totalitarian regime, and you need to stop it right now, or you will all end up in concentration camps." That was the cab driver in Berlin. And they know, right? So I hope we're all getting involved and also being present, living our life, enjoying our community. We don't have to suffer to be involved in the world. So that was a complete aside from your question, Lauren. But I do hope people are showing up to the larger world, and I'm trying my best. I know it always feels insufficient when there's so much confusion and suffering in the world of so many different kinds right now. Right? My daughter is the exact age of the girls who were killed in Texas in the floods. So yeah, we're doing personal work and social work at the same time, and that I think is really important. Go ahead, Steve. I'm sorry to go on too long.
No, perfect. The folks, you've got just another moment if you want to squeeze a question in. You won't have many opportunities like this with someone like Ethan, so feel free to drop a question or to raise your hand. And as people are looking for that hand raise button, Ethan, I want to read a paragraph, and as we sort of head toward our wrapping up, and it's just a beautiful little moment in the book, and then we'll grab Ellen's question and then head toward our close. Why is equalizing self and other rather than martyrdom considered the most mature articulation of compassion? It's not because of any moralizing involved in the experience. Rather, it's because of the felt experience of those instances of open heartedness that we each glimpse all the time. These are the moments when the concepts of self and other, all those irrelevant questions of who deserves love the most, momentarily fall away. When we can tap into this experience of interconnectedness, the feeling of care starts to move naturally wherever it needs to go without being held back by any conceptual framework of who deserves compassion. Feels like a warm embrace and a support for holding our seat. So thank you for that. I want to be clear with everybody that if you want to hear more and learn more about this, there's lots of ways to connect with Ethan. A great way to do it is read this book. But you could also come to the Garrison Institute. That link is in the chat, and you can sit with and study with Ethan and a team for a full week at the end of September 29th. And you could join us at the Garrison Institute in person. And I think that's going to be a really special experience that I hope to come and do some sitting with you all as well. And Ethan, thank you so much for this time. I wonder if you could just take a moment and close us out, maybe with a brief practice or word.
Yeah. So this is going to be a very simple practice from the Windhorse teachings, which originates in Tibetan Buddhism. We're going to talk about this more on the retreat as well. It's done in multiple forms, but the idea of Windhorse is to quickly, it's usually a very quick meditation. It's a good meditation for before, like say a meeting that we're nervous for, or at the beginning of a day, or right after lunch, when you just have 2 minutes. And it's for quickly coming into your own body, your own experience, touching your heart, and then trying to expand your awareness and your heart out to your present environment. So we're just going to there's a 5-step form of this practice in the book. We'll just do a very brief 3-step Windhorse meditation. So come into your seat. Now bring all of your attention into your heart center, like almost a concentrated attention to your heart center, like all of your power gathering at the heart. Now soften that attention, but stay in the heart and just feel the tenderness of your heart. Feel genuinely whatever you feel in your heart. And then the third step, from the heart, just imagine like a radiating rays of sunlight, awareness expanding in all directions. So your gaze can be at the horizon. You can open your eyes to do this. And just a feeling that the heart is going out in all directions, in front of you, behind you, the side body and the periphery, above and below. Just expanding awareness in all directions. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ethan. Thank you, everyone. We hope to see you at the retreat in September.